Welcome to my session on wandering down the FHIRPath. So had to try and find a new pun to go, and so that was as good as I had. I apologise for the delicious sepia tone. Apparently it's good on the recording, so if you go and watch this back, it won't look like this, it'll have white. But yeah, I thought for a sort of a theme, let's use AI and get some images in there, and so I thought let's have a bit of an exploration theme, and I like the old low-res, old-school game style, so this is what we get. So we're going to wander down the FHIRPath. So who am I? I'm Brian Postlethwaite, a senior software engineer at Microsoft Research. I've been working on FHIR for near on 10 years, particularly in the areas of FHIRPath and structured data capture. And in terms of my activity with the HL7, I'm on the FHIR management group, co-chair at the patient administration work group, and work on a lot of open source tools and tool chains, particularly in the .NET stack. So enough about me. So what are we going to get to today? So the whole idea for this session was to give you a good solid foundation of the FHIRPath language so that you can go forward and conquer the world in your explorations. Give some good tips on common mistakes and workarounds. So where are some of those little gotchas as we go along? And particularly tools to work with FHIRPath. Yay, FHIRPath Lab. And go through some examples and tips and tricks on how to get in there. And it wouldn't be a session at DevDays without having the obligatory little bit of AI in there for generative. And yeah, get ready. So after this, we've got a hands-on lab, which is no slides. So all in the lab actually trying to create expressions. So without further ado, so what is FHIRPath? Why is FHIRPath? And what's the status of the spec? So FHIRPath is really, it's a navigational language expression for navigating through a resource instance and either manipulating it, finding particular pieces of data, or performing some form of evaluation to get a result based on that input material. And so, well, don't we have lots of other techniques for doing this sort of thing? So if we look with XML, there's been XPath, which does the same sort of thing. We've got JSON, and there's a JSON path, which actually came around after we'd done the FHIRPath stuff. Or why don't we just use stuff like LINQ or JavaScript or any of the other languages? They're all really good options, and if you're working in those stacks, they make a lot of sense. But if I want to share something that's actually executable across a broad variety of environments, we need something more common to be able to run across those languages. So we want something to work on JSON and XML primarily, because that's the native FHIR representation. So into the FHIRPath spec itself. So there's a normative version of the spec, and there's a current build. So if we go in, click through. Yes, that's still sepia tone, so it's not just the slides. So yeah, so that's the normative spec that's there. And if I go back, which is what I'll actually walk through as we go through. So this is the draft continuous integration build that is now current. So there's a few extra things in there. So we see this little STU note to say this is the stuff that's different since the last publication, but I'll come back to that later on. And we are planning on going to ballot again this year sometime, to actually get those STU parts to be more normative. So the stuff that's actually been around, that's implemented in the engines that are out there, and to get that more stable, I guess. So, FHIRPath uses in FHIR. So we've just sort of a quick flash to say that was the FHIRPath spec. So what about with FHIR? So how does FHIR and FHIRPath relate? So there's another page. So if I go into the FHIR spec itself, the FHIR spec has a page on FHIRPath. Because FHIRPath itself, despite the name, is not FHIR dependent. You can run FHIRPath on anything. And so we've got this FHIRPath page in the FHIR spec to explain how do you work with FHIRPath in FHIR. So how does it work with extensions and types and all of that side. So, but we'll walk into that a little bit more. So, structure definitions is one place where we use FHIRPath expressions. Can I have some suggestions on other places in FHIR where we use FHIRPath?
Test script.
Test script. Excellent.
Search.
Search. Anyone else? Questionnaires. Beautiful. Anyone else? Codable concepts? Not specifically, but SQL on FHIR, so that was another one. I thought that would come out quicker since there's been a few sessions on that. And then the FHIR mapping language. Of course, there are many other places where you can use it. Someone mentioned to me this morning, which I should have had on the slide, FHIR patch. Thank you, Christian. I probably should have had that there. But yeah, so it's very, very flexible. And it's really built around a logical model. So it's not like with XPath is built on XML. JSON path is built on JSON. So FHIRPath is around a logical model. So we can then apply those to actual concrete models, which is what FHIR does. So we need those data type mappings. So that's another part where we map those strict data types into the actual concrete data types. So one of the new additions was the integer 64, so long in the FHIR R5. And so one of the extensions is how do we support that with the model and those FHIR specific extras. And one thing that's worth note is polymorphism. So as you know, with FHIR, we've got properties which could be a date, or it could be a Boolean, or it could be another sort of choice type. And so with that, the FHIR spec says patient.deceased X, which indicates that this can be multiple types, which in this particular case is, yes, a date, time, or a Boolean. And so from the FHIRPath language perspective, we just refer to that as deceased. So we don't throw the X on the end because that would be really confusing. And on the wire with XML and JSON, we actually have deceased Boolean, but you don't write that in your expression. So that's one of the little traps as you walk through. Cool. So we'll start off with the step one. So direct navigation. So how do we walk through? So if we look at the instance, it's really just a tree of nodes in the resource. So we've got this particular instance has a patient with the root, a couple of names, an active property, and this name is broken up into a handful of properties. So I can see here I've got a collection where there's 2 given names and then some extensions. And so as we do that selection walking the tree, so if I take an example like patient.givenname is my expression, I'll go from patient.name, so now I'll get my 2 nodes, and then I've got my step down through our dot to our given, so we'll get our dot out and gert, and then assuming this last one was a given name, I'd get that node as well. So it's really around how do we walk through this tree to produce those results on the end. So that seems pretty simple. Yep. It's a really fluent style language where you just keep going dot property, dot property, dot property. Yep. So this one's not quite a simple navigation, but just showing how that you can walk through the different things. So we've got our name. So we go from our patient, go to our name. Hang on, what just happened? What happened to patient? How do I know to step down? So back when I look at the previous one, we started at patient, but the patient as a type at the start is completely optional. So if you happen to start here and your expression started with encounter, then it would go, well, I'm not one of those, and so it would stop and just return an empty set. So whereas here, just having the name, we just walk straight in to those 2 name elements. And so now, even though we haven't covered functions yet, I'll sort of just briefly touch on that. We go where, so we create a condition to say family.exists. Okay, so do we have families on this name? Yes. that one's cool. Let's pretend this one doesn't have a family, it's just got something else, then that one won't be included. And so at this point in the execution, I'll just have one name as the input collection, and then I'll evaluate that .given, so I'll get those two results coming out. That seem not too bad? Yep, it's kind of linkish if you're in SQL in .NET, which is kind of cool. Right, patient.deceased time. Sorry, I should have updated the example to actually include one of those nodes on here. But, so we're at the start, we're at patient, yep. So if I pretend this name is that deceased flag, am I going to step into that? No. Because remember when we looked at the polymorphic types, from a FHIR's perspective, it's actually the deceased property. The type is one of the JSON or XMLs. So that is one of the traps, and the older versions of the engines used to support that, and some of them still do as a workaround back, but not all the engines do. So good trap and nice to show. And then we have, because FHIR has extensions, so patient dot, and I should have updated, birth date dot extension. So we have a function which is a sort of a shortcut to go to an extension, and we can know that that URL is the same, but it sort of gives us a shortcut to get to the dot value. So that's kind of cool. So that was the navigation mode, pretty simple, pretty familiar, and all pretty cool. So operators. So we've got our simple math operators, plus, minus, division, doing all that sort of stuff. We've got logical operators for doing comparisons. And so the little tilde is an approximation. So if you've got rounding issues going on, you can catch those around that. Implies. Implies is a logical construct. So it's sort of similar to the ors and ands. Casting for is and as, and set operators. So this set operator, the vertical bar, that's not a union operator. So it's not trying to take this collection and then concatenate this collection. It's a set operation to say this one and that collection, but remove any duplicates. So if you expect that you're concatenating, that's not what that is. Note, these don't support collections. So if you've got something that you expect could be a collection, you'll get an issue if you try and do a collection of things plus one. No. So for those things, we'll need to move inside a select, which I'll come up to. So, but it was just a nice little flavour. That's one of the really common issues where you think you're working with a singleton or just a single item, but it's actually a collection. And those can be pretty subtle. The AND operator is not, in some languages it's bitwise, in some languages that's a logical AND, whereas with the FHIRPath, that's a null what's the term? So when you add a left-hand side, so if either side is null, an AND will return whatever the other side is, whereas if you go and add two strings, so string plus string, will return empty if either of them are empty. So that's one reason why you'd go AND or plus, so you can get some really nifty tricks. So, functions. So functions all run on a focus or a context. So given everything's a collection, so just as I walk through those examples, when I went patient.name.where, so where being the function, so that name collection is the focus or context that where is evaluated on. So that makes some sense? Seems logic, but sometimes it's a little weird. They all have parameters and arguments, that's pretty obvious. They're going to return a value or a result. Types, polymorphism and casting. So as we've seen, because you can just walk through anything, through any property, and we've got the choice types, you can end up having multiple types be possible to come from any specific place. So if I went into that patient.deceased, that could be either of those two types. So it could be a Boolean, it could be a date time. So we can use a casting, so we can either as Boolean, which doesn't work on a collection, or I can use an of type Boolean, which will work on a collection. So there's sort of a workaround there. And yeah, so with this particular example, which is similar to what we had before, we have where name.family.exists.given.empty. If I get to this point and there are no given properties, so like this first half, if that produces no results, so there were no names that have a family in there, we still have a look and say, are there any givens? No. Empty set in, empty set out. And then we've got this function .empty, which is running on that empty collection, and therefore it returns true. So that was just a good example to say, just because you've gotten to a point and there's no more nodes in that collection doesn't mean you stop. Because there could be a .exists, there could be something else at the end that actually goes, oh yeah, we ended up with nothing, so it's kind of neat. And yes, just a reiteration, everything is a collection, even if you don't think it is. So, and yeah, once again, select will bring you out of that. And we've got sort of 4 categories. It's a pretty loose categorization. We've got some projection functions, which I'll go into in more detail, which is like selecting and filtering on what it is. Existence functions, which we just saw with exists, and there's all true and a couple of others like that. And some manipulation functions, like string join, a couple like that. And evaluation functions, like the .pow for doing a power of, and like those. So just to walk in, so I put some nifty hyperlinks in there, so when you get home and you dive back into the slides and go, I really want to check this out, you can go and follow those, and so we can see where they are. And existence functions, just to have a bit of a taste of what's in there. Empty exists with taking the criteria coming in. All true, any true. Yep, you get the idea? Yep. So just to drill in, so projection functions are well worth bringing a special focus on because you're going to use them a lot, especially when you're doing invariants or processing those collections to say, I want to select something, or I want to make a where clause to say reduce something down. I'm just interested in the first one or the last one, or skip some, and combine, repeat, aggregate. And those introduced a $this and $index variable. So I will go into a lot more detail on $this in a moment, but it's just worth noting that because these are all collection-based functions, so the collection comes in, and then it'll actually set the this and index for the evaluation of what those ... are as it runs through each node in that input collection. So it's intended to run through every node in the input collection, set those 2 variables, and then run the expression, and then the result is the collection of what comes back out. That seem pretty straightforward? Yep, cool. If you've got where clauses, that thing inside the where clause needs to return a Boolean. So if you've got a collection in there, a collection isn't a Boolean, it will go no and won't give you the results you expect. So use an all true or .exists or whatever is appropriate for your particular where clause. Awesome. And before I jump into $this, to try and give a bit more of a flavour on that, variables, so there's 2 types of variables. So there was that $this and $index is one format for those variables. And then we have % context, % resource, and %resource. So these are set and locked on the initial call to an evaluation. So these variables never change. I would have said up to about 2 months ago that all variables never change, but that's changed. So great. But yeah, so these ones never change. Cool. So none of these variables change. So yeah, what is %context? So that's if you're processing an invariant. So the input to the engine is the resource, the whole resource, but you want to test this specific property. So if I'm running an invariant on the patient.contact, so I've got an expression on that, then each contact itself would be passed as a different execution with that %context being one of those contacts. Yep, that kind of makes sense, cool. So this is a very interesting topic and is very confusing, and what seems like it should be really obvious, and because we've all had in other coding languages, we've got a sense of what this is or what me is, and so we try and impose that understanding into FHIRPath, and sometimes it's right, but sometimes it's not. And so this was really just a watch out, there is a real catch here. And so initially, $this is set to the context when you start. So, okay, that's kind of weird, but sure. And the only time this variable is set when it's processing each item during the evaluation of a function that has parameters of type expression. So you might think everything is expression in FHIRPath, and you're right. But in the spec, if I go back to the spec, and I look for something like this, so where criteria is an expression. So this is one that will do the actual variations. But if I scroll down blindly to somewhere else, I'll find something like this, to quantity unit string. So even though I can have an expression in there that might evaluate to form some form of a string, so I might do a concatenation of some stuff, and that will evaluate, but it's not of type expression, so it won't impact the $this. So another really good one is when you're doing a string manipulation. So I want to go .substring. So you might think that that's actually, where's the slides? Did I have that? Yep, so good examples, bundle.entry.resource.all. So yes, so this is a collection. Now we're iterating through. So $this is a really good place for using that. And we're going to check, is that an observation? And because this is, so is a, you can't use on collections or it'll throw an error. So this is singular, and so is observation. So some of the stuff you see is bundle.entry.resource as observation. Works great on your test if you've only got one observation there, but as soon as you put 2 in, boom, doesn't work. So good example. Aggregates, this is actually the best case. So $this plus total, because as it iterates through the aggregation and doing a sum, perfect. Bad examples. So where is this? What am I iterating? So this is kind of thinking, oh yeah, I'm iterating on the name. Nah. So you're going to get into a lot of trouble if you start walking in there. Some engines that might do what you want, but be really cautious on that sort of stuff. Is what's this? It's not the iteration of characters, because you're not iterating through that. So yeah, it's just if you're walking in there, real bad. Name.given.if. If is another really questionable one. So just don't do it, please. And so the idea that we've got is that the focus, so we're going to introduce a $focus, which is closer to that thing that you natively think is going to be the iterator. So it's even worse when you walk in to do stuff like in there, that you think it's going to be the this is going to be whatever that is, but you're probably 2 or 3 steps back from where you think it is. So whereas focus is always going to be the current thing that you're working on. So that will be cool. So recent additions. So we have string functions we added encode, decode, so you can do base 64 encoding or decoding, which is really nifty. A couple of others, escaping, unescaping, and my favourites, trim, split, and join. So how many people have always wanted that? Yeah, me. Yay, here's another one. Define variable, which is the thing that introduces variables at a point. Please come and ask me about that. I love it, but you know, when you need it, you need it. Otherwise, you can ignore it. And that data type. Cool. So before I get into doing some debugging, so shameless plug for the FHIRPath lab. So this is an open source tool that's open for everyone to use, and its whole purpose in life is to help you write and debug and test FHIRPath expressions. And it's not an engine itself, it's just a testing tool. And so you'll see in the corner up here, it's currently using the FHIRPath JS engine, so you can switch out and say, I want to see this running with the FHIRPath JS engine, which is in LH forms and quite a few other things, which is JavaScript client side. Or I can switch it to use the Filey engine or the Happy engine, which is what's in the IG publisher. So it's really about helping that. So we want to help you create, test, debug, and share all that stuff. So just a little bit about that. So it is an in-browser app, so no, there's not a VS Code extension, so you don't have to download stuff. I've had people ask me and I go, sure, if you want to write one, it's all open source, grab it, go nuts. But yeah, so I'm running in the back end. There's some services with my .NET engines, the Java engines, and I'm just tracking from an App Insights perspective how many hits are happening. So just so I know which engines are getting hit, so I don't store or record anything. That's done inside. And at the moment, I'm working through with Beta Software, which has got a FHIRPath engine in Python, and Aidbox have submitted a pull request for their engine as well. So you'll have each of those engines, which is super cool. So let's have a look at some tooling. So my tool. So debugging expressions. So use the trace effectively. So the trace function is the printf or the console.log of the FHIRPath world. that's the best thing I can say about it. And yeah, abstract syntax tree. So let's get in and have a look at an example. Click. So that's the other thing I love about it. I can just share a link straight to an expression, complete with, so that's the expression, the result, and which engine you were using. So that's super cool. I want to get some help. I'll go click. I've got several options here. So this is running with the Filey engine. Or I can show it with the, I can see which version it was running, or the Happy engine. You know, I should have done some of these things to make sure it was all warm and running before I got here, but it looks like it's all running pretty nicely, so that's, whew. So this share link, so I've got two share links actually, one for Zulip and one for just the browser. So you can click on that. Actually, I'll put in a different context code, even though this is not going to work. It's the whole point. So I can copy that, paste it, throw it in an email, send it to my friend, and that comes through. So it's, yes, it all looks like blah, 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 at the top, but that's just so I can compress it down and it's a lot more easy to mess with. And so, well, what's the Z one for? So that's the Zulip share link. So we can click on that, and then we come here into the Zulip. We can then paste that expression, so exactly as we had, and all that really is, it's just, if I preview it, it now shows the expression as I had, because it's all markdown. It's just got the expression in the markdown, and then I hide the link, which is sort of goes out to the FHIRPath lab. So that is the same as copying the other one. So instead of just having this big glob, it's more readable when you go to the lab. Yeah, there we go. People can go and have a play. That's a shameless plug for the Zulip stream. That's where you go if you want to go and ask questions. And this is for the hands-on lab. I put a few samples for next. Cool. And what else do I have? The abstract syntax tree. That's a nice idea. So what's an abstract syntax tree? Dunno. Okay, so it's a tree structure. So I'll show that on the right. So that represents and follows through. I'll just invert that tree. So which parses, so once you parse that thing out, each of these things is a token, and then it displays those tokens so that it can, when your expressions are large, you can then sort of collapse down and say, well, what's inside that where, what's outside, so it can help you try and navigate through it, so which is kind of cool. And also the other real cool part about it is I want a bit of help on the where clause, so I can click on that, and that takes me straight to the spec, to the where clause, and I can read about it, so that's also pretty neat. And 5 minutes, excellent. Yes, 5 minutes. Cool. And if I'm running against the Filey engine, so actually I'll just show you what it looks like with the other engines. I don't get the type information, but if I run against the Filey engine, I actually get the type information. So it actually helps you work out if you've wandered into something and it could be multiple types. This will help you diagnose, oh, I didn't expect that to be one of those, or I didn't expect that to be a collection. And so it can really help you with that, which is kind of neat. And the other really cool part, I'm going to just clean and go back. So when you go just to FHIRPath Lab, it's in here. We can go into our tester. And if I go and say givens, so that you and I know that there's no property called givens, and I'll run that. And I go, yep, there are no givens, but that's fine. We'll just join and you'll get those names. But if I run that against the Filey engine, we've got the static validator is also checking that expression, and it'll tell you, even though that's a valid expression from a FHIRPath's perspective, from a FHIR-4 perspective, that's not cool, and it says that's the problem. So it'll help you diagnose that issue a lot faster. That's cool. And yeah, I always recommend, what's another good one? Where given, this will be interesting. So run that, use given in context. It says property given's not on string. Well, that's true. So let's just take that back up. And I'll put it somewhere where given does exist. Run that. And so now it tells you, remember that little tip I had earlier? So don't make wheres not have a Boolean. So that's a case where we've got, and I see that all the time, especially with identifiers, .type, coding.code equals this. One, collections don't work on that, so you get that issue, but exists will work through that. We can go through that later. Cool. And that trace result shows where they come out. And I've got the handy little link so I can take you to which part of the resource that came from. So you've got a massive resource, that's super useful. So you can trace to get at your thing. All right. I went through sharing with the Zulip, so where that was, so that was neat. The toolings and engines. We've got the FHIRPath Labs, which is mine, which runs in Vue.js. The FHIRPath engines, so FHIRPath.js, which is JavaScript. Filey's has the .NET 8 and others. Happy, and I've got the static validator, which you can use if you want to use that in the .NET stack, and AidBox and Python's new, and I saw from the other day we've also got a Go implementation now too. FHIRPath and Generative AI, maybe I'll pick this up in the hands-on lab, but I have added an OpenAI style chat, so you can get something cool like this. Let's just put that back to what it was. And say, cool, remove the trace. Yes, perfect. We'll pull that up in the next one, and I'll fix my key and we'll try that again. But the idea being that you can run that from within the tool and manipulate it and get your own help. Cool. Probably the last thing on that is it's using the OpenAI public APIs, and you can either, or API definition, so if you don't provide an API, it will go to the public ones with the key that you provide, and then you can choose which model to use, or if you're running it in Azure OpenAI, you can pass the endpoint to that and the credentials, or if you're running Ollama locally, you can also point it at that. So I've supported all those things, which is really cool. that would have been the demo that you would have seen live, so always there. Maybe I'll cover that next time. But I guess that's really what we went through. So what is FHIRPath, navigating, where it's used, some of those common traps. I hope that you've been able to get a few tips in there. And we sort of missed out on that last one, but we'll have a look at that at the start of the hands-on labs, which is always more fun to give a bit more of a live look. So I'm here, I've been here all week. Thanks for those that came to the SDC sessions, which is where I use this all the time. And yeah, the hands-on labs next. And time for Q&A, if people want to ask. I have at least one to start there, too.
Hi, great talk, thank you. I'm in the process of implementing my own engine for use in C++, and I was wondering if there's a set of unit tests that I can use to verify my code. Where can I find that?
They're in GitHub. So where are we? GitHub, HL7. It's in the HL7 or the FHIR repo? It might be the FHIR. Repos, FHIR test cases. So in here, then each of the languages I've been messing around with 4B, and then you'll find FHIRPath, and there it is. So inside that you'll find, can you see? Yeah. So groups of tests which give on what's going on, and then what that specific test is, and in there. And just since this is kind of cool, actually I won't do that one. Let's go find another one that's not comments. So say something like that one. You can also go to the lab, go to the expression library, and click, click. What have I done? Oh. Come on, test simple. Okay. Test. I'm not having a good day right there. Test sim. Yep, so test single. So these are those tests. So you can see that test, and then clicking through the link, that'll actually take you to that actual unit test with that stuff in it. So yes, thank you for the good question. I should have planted someone like you for that.
Hey, so I'm an old school XPath guy that's trying to slowly convert myself to the FHIRPath religion. But there's one area that I've kind of struggled with, and maybe it's a stupid question, but how do I select any element anywhere in the tree? Like an XPath, that's very simple. Slash, if I want names with a family sub-child, I'll just go / name square brackets family.
So you want to get all the children?
I want to get all names that have a family anywhere, whether they're in a patient, practitioner, or in a contained resource somewhere. You know, if I got a big bundle of stuff, I just want to collect everything that could be anywhere. So descendants of, okay, there we go.
So descendants is a function that walks through not just its immediate children, but all of their children recursively. So expensive, but it's doing exactly what you asked for. Of type can cast to say I'm only interested in the human names within that, and then go nuts. Okay. Yep, cool.
I invariably use select wrong. So because of the fact that a lot of the time you can go through, you can not know you're in a collection because everything still works until you invariably get to the wrong place. Could you give another example of how to use select correctly?
So yeah, so every resource is a collection. So so you don't have an example off the top of your head? No. Contact. So so if I run that, so yep, so there's contact. How many do I have in this example? One, actually. The other cool part is I can actually put those up the top, and trace. Yeah. And I need to give a trace a name, me, run. And so that'll show that there's only one contact in the whole thing. So it's not exactly showing your thing, but I'm just sort of showing off some tool. And that shows the whole contact. But if you wanted to walk in, so without a real example, it gets more difficult. Dot relationship, dot coding, dot code. So that'll give me one. So I've got one thing in there. And so I could just go add dash test, and that's valid. But if I had more than one relationship, coding.code, relationship, coding, so if we put a second coding in here, so is this the sort of case that you expect? And you go, oh, I can't add a collection to that. So what would I do to resolve that? So if I'm running against the .NET engine, I'll get the same sort of message. But if I look at the, I should be able to then go .select, select $this, because I'm doing that iterator and walking through, and run. And so now I can see with that expression, I can see at, if I invert it, it's a little bit more normal. I should change that default. So from the top, our contacts were a collection, so I knew that at this point. Our relationships are a collection. So let's just say, for example, I wanted to remove that, thinking, oh, I've resolved that collection problem. But relationships are also a collection, so my problems come straight back. So I can see, where do I want to inject that? Or maybe I'm going to put that, I didn't intend it to go and get the first contact. I wanted to get whatever was the first one when I got there. So by that point, now I'm down the bottom. It was kind of cool. Does that help at all? Yeah, cool. So probably got time for one last question, and maybe two.
Hey, thanks for the talk. I don't see the slides in Hoover.
They will be in there as soon as it's done, but yes. I updated them not that long ago. Cool.
Thanks, Brian. Great talk. This might be a silly question, but is it possible to write an expression that's specific to a specific version of FHIR?
Well, when you run the engine, so each of the engines have specific versions. So if I'm running the FHIRPath JS, the engine itself is version agnostic, but one of the parameters you pass to it is which engine, which model set I'm going to use. So with the Happy or the Java stack, there is a separate implementation for each version. With the .NET stack, similar to the FHIRPath JS, it's a version agnostic engine, but you pass it and tell it, this is the version of FHIR I want you to work with. Does that answer the question?
Sounds like the answer is no. Why put it in the expression itself?
The expression, it's not embedded in the expression, and so when you're writing an expression, you need to have an idea that I'm writing this expression which will be valid for version X. Okay. And so if there's differences, then you'll need a different expression. Yeah. Yep. Cool.
For the XML implementation, are you going to build like a DOM tree?
So each of the engines, apart from the FHIRPath JS, which is purely JSON, because that's really the web world, so both the Happy and the Filey ones work on the object model.
Okay.
So it's gone through the parser, which has changed it from whether it was JSON or XML into a normal node representation.
Have you tried like a test of the performance?
Each of them is different, and each of them has different complications depending on your input and the complexity of the expressions. So, but they're pretty good. They're pretty good. Yeah. Cool. And yeah, just that was the last demo that works in my dev env. And just to show that what's better than doing that in ChatGPT, which it can. So doing it in here, it automatically has the context, it knows what the resource is, it knows the expression, and then when you make the thing, you can click and it'll just update your expression. So it helps stay in focus quicker.
Is there a follow-up?
That's it.
I mean, another session?
There's a hands-on lab straight after this.
And also here?
And give feedback. I don't actually know which room it's in.
Maybe.
I should check.
Nice to know. It's here. Okay. It's here.
Thank you.
And that's right after this session. Well, thank you very much, Brian.